there was particularly, I'd say it was my 6th or 7th year, and I was sitting with a partner who I liked a lot, worked with a lot. And, you know, he had, I think, all the hallmarks of like a good life, like a $10 million book of business, lived in a $3 million home. His suits were more than my car.
Right.
I mean, like, it was just like, you know, sort of all the lavishness, right? Mm-hmm. And then he's like, you know what? I don't think my wife likes me. I don't think I like my wife. I don't think I like my home. He's like, I think my kids like me, but I don't even like me enough to like my kids. I just want to die.
Yeah. Gosh.
And at that point, I was like, you know what? Maybe something here is broken, right? Like, maybe this isn't, like, something here's not working. And I think that for me, a lot of it was the promise.
Welcome to another great, riveting, exciting, thrilling, exhilarating, devastatingly awesome, epically wonderful episode of Breaking the Law. I'm Sam Foreman. I'm your co-host. I'm the founder of Foreman Law. We focus on mergers and acquisitions and business law. And the best part of my life right now is, I think it's probably what I will refer to as bed jitsu. Okay. I have 2 little kids. They break into our room at night. And so I am randomly kicked in the face, elbowed in the ribs. It's wonderful. It's a fabulous workout. It's not great for sleep, but I know that I will enjoy it more in retrospect than I do right now. But honestly, it's still a great part of my life.
Yeah.
So our guest today is Matt Agnew. Matt is a veteran / survivor of big law. We can edit out survivor if you want, Matt. We'll leave that up to you. And he is the founder of Agnew Law, which focuses on healthcare law and does an extraordinary job at that, and business law, and does just as an extraordinary job at that as well. And my co-host today is Ashlyn Lindskog. And Ashlyn, I'm allowed to do an introduction for you, right?
That's right. I've asked you to introduce me today.
Okay. Ashlyn does law stuff. All right.
Amazing. Well, you've really nailed it. I think you really got into who I am and what I do as a person there.
Ashlyn is a fabulous attorney, a great friend, really cares about making our industry a better place for the people that provide law and receive legal services. And is a wonderful mother and has done a terrific job starting her own firm as she has also transitioned away from a traditional law firm model to doing something different, something better for her and her family. And you have 4 kids?
3
kids? Does it seem like 4 sometimes?
It seems like 17.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Well,
and my very favorite thing in life right now is I have a 6-year-old who's reading chapter books. And so when I get ready in the morning, instead of turning on TV or whatever, he sits in my room and reads to me. We're particularly interested in a series called Dog Man right now. So we hear a lot about some spinoff of Captain Underpants. Yeah. So my mornings start with being read to by a 6-year-old, and it is truly the light of my life. So that's been really fun.
Dog Man is the truth.
Dog Man is the light. So.
And the publishers of Dog Man, if you'd like to sponsor our show, we would be willing to accept in-kind contributions for our personal libraries.
Because I got to tell you, Dog Man ain't cheap. Okay? They're real proud of those books.
Those flip-oramas are giving some really good wear and tear in those books.
I love it because we're librarying Dog Man these days. We're balling on a Dog Man budget, and he told me we can't get them from the library anymore because the flip-oramas don't work as well because the pages are torn. And I was like, well, what are you going to
do? That's for real. That's for real. I have to do voices for all the characters in Dog Man. I'd like to say that I'm really good at it, but instead I'll just say my kids probably think I'm really good at it.
That's all that matters.
That's all that matters right now.
That's right.
Yeah.
Matt, what's something awesome in your life right now?
Oh, my little one is sort of in her phase of just like very brutal honesty.
That's wonderful.
And it's really great at times, but it's also uncomfortable. I mean, we were at Great Wolf Lodge and, we were sitting in the elevator going up at the end of the day. And my little one, her name's Isla, she's like, I don't know if it's this guy or it's this guy, but one of them stinks really badly. And that guy gets off the elevator and like everyone else is like, oh, it was that guy.
It was that guy. Yeah, I can confirm.
Oh, that's amazing. That's awesome.
Man,
yeah.
I love that.
So-
That's great.
I love them.
Living through that a little bit. Last week I called her Honest Isla, and she very quickly reminded me, well, I'm not honest all the time. I lie to you often.
Oh, that is a that's a great level of security and safety in that relationship. So
My daughter
good.
says, "You want me to tell you to twoof?" I'm like, I don't know. Is it going to hurt my feelings? Then don't. I'm really, really in a sensitive place.
Oh,
It's like, you don't understand how insecure us lawyers are.
Right.
Like, please don't.
Please don't tell me to twoof.
Our youngest Hayes is he like goes back and forth between being like exceptionally verbally affectionate and complimentary. Like, I really like your dress. I like your hair. You know, he says this to my wife. I've never worn a dress.
They're very comfortable. You should try it.
I imagine it is. And not that there's anything wrong with wearing a dress. In fact, there's many wonderful things about it. Help. How do I get out of this?
Just keep going. I think just keep going.
They're breezy.
Anyway.
And then like also like hitting, just like run up.
Oh,
and hit.
yeah.
Like I feel like I need to wear a variety of protective gear when I come in the house because he's just at that age, height level, and he's also very strong.
Yeah. And you're like, wait, no. Oh, no.
He's like coming in full speed, and I just immediately like turn my body. And,
Right.
Yeah.
You're like,
yeah,
must protect
yeah,
myself.
Yeah. But
I was glad to find out that actually is like something that all kids do. Because like when I was like catching just like a fist in the jaw every once in a while, I was just like,
yeah.
excuse me?
Am
Like
I
this is
really just serial
unacceptable.
killer?
Yeah, like
Testing limits.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I wonder if this will be entertaining and safe. Let me try this. Hey, Dad, come here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Well, Matt, tell us more about kind of your journey into the law and your journey prior to starting your firm.
Yeah. So one of those rare human beings who kind of knew what he wanted to do when he was 4 years old. So I knew I always wanted to be a lawyer. Didn't know exactly what kind. Went to law school in 2011. And at that point, I kind of knew I wanted to do healthcare law. But there is not a lot of healthcare law classes in law school. It's mostly, orchestrated towards that concept of like, how much anxiety can we give you about guessing the right problem?
Yes. Yes. And the answer's a lot.
Yeah. The answer's a lot. Yeah. And so I started my practice out in Amarillo, Texas, of all places, because there is a sort of well-known national boutique healthcare practice out there. They've got about 30, 35 attorneys and just do a lot of work in pharmacy, DME, and physician group space. Do a little bit of work in the hospital space as well, but mostly those areas. So I started out there, practiced out there for about 2 years, and then went to Dallas and practiced big law in Dallas for about 8 years. Started out there at Polsinelli, and then kind of got dragged along to some other law firms by other partners, and then ended up at Shepherd Mullen, one of the, I think at the moment, 40 biggest law firms in the nation, about 1,500 lawyers. And all of them wickedly brilliant, very, very talented, but it's also big law. Very few of them seeing their family members. I mean, I think there was a Forbes article about sort of private equity investments into the law. And it was written by a non-lawyer. And like the second sentence was basically like, lawyers will leave law school to go into big law. And in doing so, they get a level of prestige and sort of resume building and definitely get paid a ton of money. But the follow-up sentence to it was, and in exchange, they give up a large portion of their happiness. It's sort of just known outside the industry that that's sort of just what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me, so when you say, when you started at the sort of smaller 35 attorney boutique law firm, did they have a sort of traditional law kind of approach? Like, that was your intro to practicing law, the billable hour model and all of that, or was it different and then you moved to big law? What was that transition like?
Yeah, it was definitely the billable model approach, very traditional law. I don't think they were desiring to be a big law firm, but I don't think that their practices, divvied that much in terms of the practice in big law. I'd say the biggest difference was the level of client contact you receive
Okay.
is substantially higher the smaller you go down the rung. And that's because the insecurity about your connection to an ability to control your book goes up the larger you go up the line. Mm-hmm. So, when I was at the first law firm I was at, I think I transitioned back like 60 or 70 clients that I was managing at that time in my second year of practice, which is kind of crazy.
That is crazy.
It's maybe not recommendable at all levels.
Right.
But I would say other than my clients, I never really, quote unquote, fully managed anybody else's clients at any of the big law firms.
Yeah.
I may be responsible for a lot of their work, but like
those client relationships weren't something you were responsible for.
That's right.
Yeah. I think that's interesting too, because Sam and I hear a lot when we talk to people about big law and I don't know if Sam does, but I get corrected sometimes. Or like, it's not just those big law firms that have the traditional law approach, even smaller law firms that have fewer lawyers still stick to the big law approach. And one of the things I think is interesting would be cool to talk about with a variety of different people, probably including Matt, is, big law is like, this is who we are, right? This traditional law approach, it's big law. You're going to make a lot of money. What do they say? Like, work hard, play hard. Like, you're going to make a lot of money, but it's worth it in the end. And then I find that like those medium-sized, smaller law firms are like, we're not big law. We're medium law. We're like friendly big law. And then you get in there and you're like, wait, you're just a smaller version of the traditional approach to law, which is can be just as toxic no matter the size of the firm.
That's right.
Okay, so moved from that to actual big law, which is what we would think. And I think you said something that's so interesting because I had the same experience in law school. Maybe it's because we went around the same time. So I'd be curious if Sam, who's older than we are, would be able to answer this question in his experience. But I too felt the pressure as a law student that the value, the prestige was going to a big law firm out of law school. It was, which big law firm are you going to? Like, who are you interviewing with? Where are you going? I don't know if you felt that same level of pressure in law school, Sam, to,
My path was a little different.
Yeah.
I definitely perceived that, the prestige that went along with it.
Yeah.
But I also think that as I thought about trying to land one of those opportunities, which I did not get out of law school, to work at some of those larger law firms, I did land at a great, local firm here, also with the traditional model, was that I wasn't even thinking about it. It wasn't even on my radar. I was almost going to call it the cost of happiness, which is sort of the way that it was phrased
in that
article. But instead, I would say that it's the cost of sadness, because I think that's what's actually being purchased, is that, going back to that article that you referenced, Matt, is that somebody is paying you or is paying people under this traditional model a certain amount in order to achieve a particular end, and it is not happiness.
Yeah.
It is their unhappiness.
Yeah.
And that wasn't even on my radar. And I don't know that I was aware of any of my colleagues that were pursuing, or my classmates that were pursuing some of these jobs, that were thinking about it in those terms either. Because I just think there's been a lot of, and I think it's a good thing, a lot of increased awareness about these trade-offs, a lot of increased transparency, a lot of increased dialogue on it.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was just like, that's the prestige. That's the win.
Yeah.
Like, go get that. That is the top paper, the A with distinction, the top of the class sort of moment is go get one of these big opportunities.
Yeah.
But it's also because big law pays for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Meaning that all of the top lawyer, designations, all of the, top 40 out of 40 designations, they have marketing departments that strategically work to accomplish those goals so as to make the industry be perceived as the prestige only existing at those levels.
Yeah.
But they don't acknowledge that they're paying for it, right? Like, they've paid for that prestige. I'm not saying that it is a criticism of paying for it. I'm just saying it as if it was honest at the law school level, right?
Yeah.
It's not real prestige.
Right.
It's not accomplished prestige.
Right.
It's not any of that.
Right.
It's just merely,
it's manufactured.
We have a very good marketing department. For example, every time the voting starts on, the lawyer, top lawyer, in the area, we would always get an email which says, reminder, you cannot tell people to vote for you. However, here's some language that you can send to your friends. Yeah. And it would be things like, hey, just a reminder, voting started and we'd really love for you to get your votes in and think about me when you're doing so.
Yeah.
That is such a lawyer way to position that.
Right. It's like, we can't tell them to vote for me, but I can suggest it.
Wink, wink, nod, nod.
It's like, it should almost, those types of awards should almost come with the same thing like they do on advertising now, where it's like, this is an ad. And then, it's like, I bought this from Amazon and you have to like have an ad. It's like, someone paid me to say this, so I'm going to say it, but it should be transparent, because I fully agree with you. As someone who was raised from a legal perspective at, a traditional law firm, who wasn't big law, was definitely a medium-sized firm, but had a big law attitude. They are excellent lawyers. They're fabulous attorneys. But I've also met lawyers that didn't grow up in a space like that, who are brilliant, smart, wonderful lawyers. The capability doesn't necessarily come from, the prestige of the firm. There are great lawyers all over the place. I know lawyers who came right out of law school, started their own firm, and charted their own path, and they're brilliant at what they do. So I think you're right. I think it is a lot of manufactured prestige, and also, you get paid a lot of money to go work at a big law firm, and for some people, that's what they're looking for at that point in time.
I think at some level, like at least for me, right? Like you talk yourself into it, right? Like you're like, okay, yes, like I hear the stories, it's bad, but it won't be that way for me.
Right.
Right. And so like you go in, and honestly, I feel like it wasn't that way for me at the beginning. Okay. Like I was like, all right, I got this, but you don't realize, the grading effect. You may only take a few layers off your top, layer the first year, but it doesn't stop. It just continually grades and grades and grades, and to a point where you're so deep into it and you don't know how to exit. Like I have, I would say, 3 of my friends who I'm talking to right now, and they're like, I would leave tomorrow if I could figure out a way. Yeah. But they don't know how to. Yeah. And honestly, that's how I felt. Like I was only there for 10 years because I was like, I think I was talking to a friend of mine who has joined my firm. She's big law, exiting big law because of all of the, mental health problems. And I said, when you go into meetings every single day where your opinion is either considered the least important in the room by your superiors, or your opinion is routinely criticized. When you go back out or even think about the proposition of like, do I open up my own law firm? Your level of confidence and your level of belief in yourself comes to this point where you're like, well, who would care? Who would listen to me? Right. And if they did, wouldn't I just be wrong? Right. And so it beats down on you to a point where like, you don't know. Even my wife realized the other day, she's like, I think I'm being anxious because of big law again. Yeah. And it's like, it's not just you.
Right. We talk about that a lot.
It's everyone around you.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there. Matt, a question I have for you is how much of that sort of gradual immersion into that, and then sort of that waking up to realizing, hey, here's what's going on. How much of that do you think starts in law school? My point sort of being like, law school in terms of workload and pressure is, in my view, completely different than undergrad for most people. And so you go from, okay, this is make or break. I have to get into the industry. Like I've wasted my time and my money if I don't. And so it becomes an all or nothing sort of stakes in law school. And then you go from that directly into big law, for example. For most people, during a phase in life where you have minimal external commitments, like most of my classmates, were single and had no kids. So talk to me a little bit about your perspective on, is this something that sort of starts in law school, and how much impact does kind of phase of life have on sort of that, the frog in the hot pot of water.
Right. You don't know
kind
it's
of dynamic
boiling until.
Yeah. Talk to me about that.
I would say it starts at birth. hate to go so far back, but I'll
It's a
explain
great
why.
place to start. Like most of us, Matt
beginning.
was born at a young age.
Just like the Bible, we start with Genesis and we'll go from there.
Yes, I love it.
The reason I say that is law school undoubtedly attracts a certain type. And a certain type that go to law school are attracted to big law.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it is not always the case, but it is largely the case that the people who go into big law are very goal-oriented and goal-driven. It's not to say that others aren't, but like they sort of live their life on career achievement and the success there than say so much a life achievement.
Yep.
I go through all that to say that I think even in like my motivation, like they point to like this sort of law being sort of the end all kind of highest quality type of law that you can practice. And if you're goal oriented, getting to the top is sort of like the basics of that framework, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
Yeah.
If you tell me it's the best, I'm going to do that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. And if you want to be the best, you got to be there.
Right.
You got to be the best at being the best.
That's right.
Right.
At the best.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Right.
then they reaffirm that with like OCI, right? Like they
Yeah.
don't give OCI for like non-traditional law firms. Like
Right.
they do OCI for the prestige, for the slots, for who gets there, who's going to end up in the summer positions. And so there's also a culture in law school then that reaffirms the idea that the primary goal is to come out and make the most amount of money.
And they rank you in law
That's right.
school, and then they select
Right.
your OCIs based on your rank. And
That's
then, so I think you're right. It is attracted to a certain type of people. There's a certain, not that there aren't outliers. And then they are like, okay, well, now you're ranked, and then now you have to apply for these interviews, and they tell you like, that very first year, this is the interview, and then you have to get a internship in the summer, and then to get that, then you have to use that to get your second internship, and if you don't have that, then you can't get a job after law school. And so it starts, you're like 3 months into law school, and you're like, I have to pick my job right now, and you're telling me the best one is that one or those three?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you don't know enough
Okay.
to select, differently.
Yeah, and I, was like you. I came into law school a little non-traditionally. I'd worked before, and so I was married, although I didn't have children. But I was asking the same similar type of questions. I did the big law sort of interviews, and I was like, so like the very millennial phrase I think at that time was like work-life balance. We were like, so like, what's your work-life balance?
Yeah.
And some law firms were like, we don't really have that. What do you mean?
Just like disqualified.
Have you seen what we pay? Like we don't have work-life balance. I'm like, okay, fair.
Yeah.
We pay you to not have balance.
Right. And
Yeah.
then other law firms were like, oh, we have the best work-life balance. You don't get paid as much in big law, but here's the exchange for that is that you have this unbelievable balance. But not all students are coming with those types of questions. And that was,
Yeah.
so I think it's an interesting perspective. And I'm curious, you mentioned sort of talking with other friends in big law about the impact on mental health as it relates to working in big law. And I'm curious about what your experience was when you started to notice. Was it, like you said, it's sort of this gradual thing where something is taking from you, and you turn around and there's a piece of you missing and you didn't see it going. But from the mental health perspective, was it kind of the same way for you? Like one day it was just like, wait, I think I'm unwell based on my experience and I've got to get there. Or were you able to sound the alarm a little sooner?
Yeah, I think there's steps to it. Like
Yeah.
just like the graduality of like sort of decaying.
Yeah.
It's like in recognizing it, there are like steps to that process where you're like, something's not right.
Yeah.
I tell a lot of people that like my overall theory, aside from the racism and sexism rampant in big law, for the reason why women and minorities are not in big law, is because people who are in positions of oppression understand their emotions better than people who are not.
Yeah.
So when I found, like, I'd say about year 5, like, I'd find my female colleagues and they'd be like, I'm dealing with some anxiety and depression, and this is how it's being created and this is how it's generating. And then I'd talk to like my male friends, traditionally white, come from wealthy backgrounds, and they're like, well, I'm doing bad. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Like, can you articulate that? And it's like, it feels bad.
I don't feel joy.
Good. Yeah.
Not good. Not good, Bob. Yeah.
I feel like I was sort of emotionally stunted in that approach as well. Like I was like more or less like, okay, this doesn't feel good. Maybe it's not forever and I can work through it.
Yeah.
Right? Like lawyers are like, we literally have been presented so many problems our whole lives and you solve them.
Right.
So the idea that like you're going to come to an unsolvable problem or something's going to grate you so hard that it's not really the future you should pursue isn't probably something that comes across your mind. And then I would say for me, probably a couple different things. I mean, having a little one, I think helps readjust your priorities and seeing sort of the value of life. But I think more so than that was seeing the detritus around me. There was particularly, I'd say it was my 6th or 7th year, and I was sitting with a partner who I liked a lot, worked with a lot. And, you know, he had, I think, all the hallmarks of like a good life. Like a $10 million book of business, lived in a $3 million home. His suits were more than my car.
Right.
I mean, like, it was just like, you know, sort of all the lavishness, right? And then he's like, you know what? I don't think my wife likes me. I don't think I like my wife. I don't think I like my home. He's like, I think my kids like me, but I don't even like me enough to like my kids. I just want to die.
Yeah. Gosh.
And at that point, I was like, you know what? Maybe something here is broken, right? Like maybe this isn't like something here's not working. And I think that for me, a lot of it was the promise, right? Like part of the pitch is, at least in my perception, is come in, be an associate, work hard because that develops your skill set. You'll come out the other end and you'll be solidly footed in a place where you can work a little less and be comfortable.
Right.
And really the final straw for me was, you know, they when they want you to become partner, they send you to like this like partnership retreat where you have to, it was.
Is that where they implant the chip or?
Yeah, that's pretty much.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, it was at the Four Seasons off the coast of California. Like,
I mean, you might get me. That's fine.
That's right. Like, so it's like you got me here.
I'm a material girl.
But there they were like, hey, look, we only bonus 40% of our partners. And I'm like, well, wait a second. If I'm going to like work my ass off, get to this level, and then I'm like putting in the work every year and the numbers show I should otherwise receive a bonus, what is sort of the reasoning for this? And their reasoning is we want our partners internally competing against each other for the most amount of hours they work, the most amount of committees they're on, the most amount of board commitments they have in the community, the most amount of mentorship relationships they have. So they want you to basically compete against 750 of the highest performing type A individuals in the world for your bonus every year.
There's no peace. There's no end.
No peace. So that's what it was for me. It's like, I just was like, if the next step has no peace, like, what is this all about?
Right.
Matt, I want to go back to the story you shared about, you know, that other attorney that you mentioned that had just kind of gotten to the end of himself. We've talked a little bit on this podcast before of this ideal that traditional law has, which is that success is climbing to the top of Workaholic Mountain. And then sort of this realization that I think a lot of people realize when you get to the top is that you're not actually at the top of anything. You're really at the bottom of something else. Do you think that is an accurate characterization of what the culture within Big Law and the business model within Big Law tries to create is to convince everyone who is a participant that, you know, go be a workaholic. That is the pinnacle. Go get to the top.
I don't think they have to convince us. I think it's once again that basic biology of like everyone there is wildly driven.
Yeah.
And everyone there wants to achieve.
And competitive.
Super competitive, right? So the notion that, you know, they need to push us to be at the top is sort of a little less so there. I mean, I think they're doing it among their partnership level so that they get no one to sort of let off the gas, and it uniquely benefits the corporation, but not the individuals, right? But I think that part of it's this notion that, like for me, I'll just tell you full disclosure, like I see a therapist, right?
Same.
One of my biggest challenges as a person is understanding the concept of like, what are we supposed to achieve with this life? And for a long time, I was very, very, very goals oriented. And I still even am very challenged with that to this day. But for me, what helped a lot was the notion that like, no matter what, because of the way we are, we never achieve a goal. Like, I didn't go to my law school graduation. I didn't celebrate my bar passage. I got it done and I went on, right? Just continued pursuing goals for the completion of the goals, not for the celebration of the goals, not for the outcome, but just for the goal.
Yeah, the value was in the work.
That's right. And honestly, the way I've been able to help correct that, and I feel like I'm living a better life because of it, is I've tried to adjust it to the concept of like if I died today and if I died 10 years from now or 20 years from now, I'd have goals that are uncompleted. And that would feel, at least on that basis of a framework, to be a failure. Instead, I've tried to look at it more so, and I think this would help for Big Law, but I don't know that it would help for everyone there. From the perspective of like, am I living my values, right? Like, what do I value as a human being? What do I think is important? And if I'm achieving the accomplishment of living my values on an everyday basis, like I could die this moment and have succeeded.
Yeah. We talk about that in the framework on the podcast a lot about like, what is your personal scorecard? And it's okay if your personal scorecard fits squarely in the framework of being successful at Big Law. If that is I would challenge the healthiness of some of that. But for the most part, if your personal scorecard is these things and it fits, that's why I think it works for some people for as long as it does, until we as humans, our lives change and shift, and we have kids and we go through experiences and we're like, wait, I think I need to reevaluate my priorities here. But I think that's such an important piece. And we talk to professors and law students too about like what, that sort of professional identity, and personal identity, what matters most, and how do I both achieve in my professional life in a way that mimics what I need to achieve personally. And again, I'm glad, I can tell you, I think in law school they're starting to get there, because we've talked to someone, at least at KU Law, who's working on sort of that identity ability to start before we're 10 years deep into a practice and looking at ourselves going, wait, this feels wrong.
I think a lot of it has to do with, and I like the word you used, Matt, values.
Yeah.
Is that and I like the reference you made to kind of how we're wired, a lot of us as attorneys when we go into law school and when we pursue those opportunities, is because we're so achievement oriented. And I think what's missing a lot of times is that connection to deeper meaning. Is that a lot of us haven't really been guided through that process before. We haven't had enough life experience to really go and figure out like, hey, why is this even important to me?
Yeah.
It's just go be the best, and that's it. And the only thing on the scorecard is more.
Right.
And instead of, the scorecard getting framed in terms of, okay, here's my big why. Here's what's most important to me. I want to take great care of my family. I want to be a active contributor to making our industry better. I want to help our team grow and thrive, and those kind of things. That's kind of my guiding star. Now what does that look like on a little bit more specific level? And instead, it's just this constant reaction mode of get into the industry and go do more, go be better, go climb higher.
Yeah.
And then so many people get to a place. I think this is part of why there's so many issues with mental health in Big Law, is that people get to a place where they've lived enough and they've learned enough to know that I want more. There's something more important to me, and it doesn't line up with this. It's that cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
And sorry, you were saying something, Ashlyn.
Oh no, I just think it's so interesting when we get into the depths of this and like we talk about values, because I'd hate for people to think that what we're suggesting is that if you work at Big Law and are doing a good job of it while you have children at home, that we're suggesting that your children or family are not at the top of your priority list. Because I think and have people I know and care about very deeply who do both well. They manage really successful law careers and are excellent present parents and spouses and all of those things. I think, though, where the gap is that it's like when you're on an airplane and they say put your mask on first. One day, even if you do it all really well and you're an excellent partner at a law firm in traditional law and an excellent present parent and family member, it had to take from somewhere. And then you wake up one day and you're like, all of my values are right, but I'm empty. Like I have, there was no sort of shift or attention to what it took from me to give so much of myself away.
Yeah.
There's also no healthy concept of practicing Big Law.
No.
Meaning that when I left, there was not an associate around me who was not struggling in some substantive way.
Yeah.
And
like
so
a badge
it's like,
of honor, honestly.
Well, yeah. And, if you looked at them like through social media or otherwise, you'd be like, oh, they're rocking, they're doing great, right? And if you actually knew them, you'd know that like, one of them was not far from probably self-harm or otherwise. And so I think there's this notion of like providing cover for Big Law. And I think it's great that you say that, because I think there are some people who thrive at certain levels of their career while they're there. But I would say overall, like on a statistical basis, look at their divorce rates, look at their suicide rates, look at their alcohol rates, look at their drug abuse rates, look at their mental health rates, right? Like they statistically are performing worse than everyone else in our industry.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's like we can give them some space, but we should also recognize that the model is so broken. As I told people, the model's so broken that it recognizes that we can kill lawyers for profit.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's a problem.
And especially a problem when I don't know. Are you breaking things?
I was getting ready to take a note.
At least you're
because that's
productive.
I'm sorry. Go on. I'm an interrupting cow. Please proceed.
That's my daughter's favorite joke. I think that you're right. And I think the saddest part of it is that, and we'll talk about this in a later episode too, when I was looking for different sort of Big Law horror stories for some research, a lot of the things I saw from people in Big Law were saying, you knew what you're getting into. Like, how dare you come on here and then try to say, oh, this is hard. Like, you knew what you were getting into. You know what Big Law is. It is this way for a reason. And if you can't hack it, go home. And it is that mindset both of being in it, that groupthink that continues to make it impossible to escape because you're being complete. I mean, it's crazy, the toll it takes on you mentally. And I think we're in a situation now where trying to correct it, like anything else, it feels like it is almost like a circling the wagons in Big Law. Like they're like, what do you mean? Like, we're Big Law. We're impenetrable. Like we're going to be fine.
It's practically impossible to, because it's not just them.
Yeah.
Right? It's also capitalism and type A personalities.
Yeah.
Like, I worked about 14 hours on Thanksgiving, 12 hours on Christmas last year. And I kept on asking the question of
Light
why.
day.
Like, why? Yeah. Why is it that like our law firm said yes? Why is it that these people are demanding these things, right? And the answer is if our type A personality attorneys didn't say yes, someone else would.
Mm-hmm. And that the client expects that.
That's the problem, is that they had an analysis or they did a survey of Big Law attorneys last year. And the survey asked, what is it that drives you all particularly insane? Like, what's really driving a lot of your mental health problems? 52% of respondents said it was client demands. About 3 days later, the American General Counsel Association, their vice president, sort of penned an op-ed in Above the Law, And in summation of his sort of position was, at the rates at which we pay you, you will jump as high as we ask and as frequently as we ask, and you'll ask no questions about it.
Yeah.
And so it was this mindset of like, we recognize that we have purchased your soul. You don't, and you need to.
Yeah. And it's like you are a commodity.
That's right.
Yeah.
That exists to me.
That's right. So that we can achieve our closing of this deal quickly so that someone else in the market as a private equity company didn't close that deal quicker than us.
Matt, I want to ask a follow-on question to that, because I feel that when I look at our industry.
Yeah.
That is the exchange that clients and attorneys feel like they're making.
Yeah.
And that attorneys who are making those decisions to accept those commitments they understand the bargain that they're making of like, hey, it's either accept this on these terms or somebody else will. And that's not going to change until like the market changes. But I'm really big on process. Like we love, in our M&A work, like we do a deal schedule. We communicate in advance. These are the milestones, because we work with a lot of people that don't manage process well. I don't know if you all have ever interacted with attorneys that are bad at calendars and deliverables and just, there's nothing like, hey, we're going to close in 3 days. Here's a bunch of stuff that I owed you 3 weeks ago that I haven't talked to my client about. That's a personal story.
I said, I sent you an email, and they said, oh, we don't really use email.
Like,
oh, no.
Well, let me provide you a referral.
I'm out.
But I look at some of this stuff, and I can't help but wonder how much of this is self-induced because people don't plan and manage well on the client side of things and the attorney side of things. Like we don't have, I've never encountered a firm, except for my own and probably yours as well, that has done a really good job of managing their workflow to stay on top of things from a timing perspective in a way that can consistently manage some of these things. And it seems like every firm I've ever bumped into has a constant backlog of about the same amount. Not between firms, but within their own firm. It's like almost like at some point they fell a certain amount of time behind and they never caught up.
Yeah.
And nobody was like, oh, hey, maybe we could do a better job for clients and for our team if we figured out how to get on top of our pipeline and reduce that down to a much more manageable number so that we are able to make proactive decisions instead of reactive decisions. So that's a really long, wordy setup, go figure, coming from a lawyer. I'm curious from your perspective, Matt, do you feel like when it came to managing those timelines and expectations that anybody was acting in a proactive manner on either the client side or the attorney side to say, hey, we can do better than this sort of constant management of fires and reaction, but we need to be more purposeful with process? Did you feel like there was any of that going on? Or was it more of just the expectation and the norm and the accepted standard is we're just going to react to everything as we're going along, and it's going to be like, hey, how high?
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is for some reason, lawyers, for lack of better language, have gotten into a position where they think the service industry means they just have to eat shit to eat shit.
Yeah.
And it's gotten to a point where like let's take Wichita, for example, right? Wichita is lacking a lot of attorneys. Kansas is losing an average of 70 a year, I think, right now, based on our graduation to loss ratio. At the need for our service, the demand for our service continues to go up. But we still are challenged with people valuing our service, thinking that our rates are acceptable, believing that legal services are even needed. And so, there are, but I think that's lawyers. Like I think lawyers did that to ourselves. Like we all
absolutely agree.
There's always someone in the market who will always, go low. And I don't mean like low from like a monetary perspective, but I mean from a, hey, it's okay that you called me on a Saturday. We'll get that done by Monday morning.
Yeah.
Creating a culture of clients just being able to treat our services like it's a McDonald's drive-through, right?
I think that's true. but also why law firms, and maybe not so much big law, but those who are recruiting straight out of law school and training, straight out of law school, remember that mid-sized, because generationally, at least from where we are back, and I know that our firms are doing the same thing. Like we're setting some boundaries with our clients, right? No, you don't get me here and there after that. You don't, like, this is the way that it works with me. And I know that the younger lawyers coming out of law school are better boundary setters than we were, or are probably still. But I think, like, I have this memory when you talk about that of, I got an assignment for a client that was very important to the firm I was working at. They're the bread and butter client, the client that keeps the door open, and they needed this, that, or the other thing, and it had to be done over Christmas. It had to be done between the week between Christmas and New Year's, and everyone else is off, and even the person giving me the assignment is like on vacation, and he's like, it has to be done. And then I did it because that's what you do. Because it felt like a challenge, and I was like, okay, let's do it. And that played into my need at that point in time. And then I remember getting a review, and one of the things on the review was, Ashlyn showed up and worked on a holiday, and that's the kind of work ethic we like to see. And I remember looking at that and going, ew, like, what? That's what I'm being measured on? Not about my work product, not about how good it was, not about that I'm a good lawyer, not that I've learned something, not that I've helped anyone, but that I was willing to show up on a day that most people wouldn't show up, or no one else is expected to show up but me. That's insane. But it's like, it's not just because the work needs to be done. It's a measure in which what you're willing to give. What are you willing to give up to be successful here? And I think you're right. I think it starts with, at the very least, this sort of capitalism client expectation. I pay you, you do it. And it's like, I don't want to anymore.
Right. It's like we've lost sight of that fundamental element of exchange.
Yeah.
Or we've recalibrated it to the point where the most important thing is the money that's being exchanged.
That's right.
Like the money and not the value that's being delivered in exchange for the money. And I think that there's a fundamental lack of self-respect for ourselves and the industry that I think has gotten particularly acute, because I completely agree with you. It is lawyers who are dramatically contributing to the client expectation that this can be a close to on-demand service.
Yeah.
And not one in which I need to be proactive and be a helpful partner in maximizing the value of the exchange by putting my team in a position to succeed. And that happens too often. I mean, there's a lot of great clients out there that'll be like, hey, I need this in 4 weeks, or I need this in a month, or whatever. And it's a completely reasonable time frame. And I don't want to lose sight of that. But then there's a lot that they're not proactive. They're not, and they're waiting to the last minute because honestly, as an industry, we've created that expectation, and we've undervalued the exchange that we bring to the table. And I think that it's important to rebalance that a little bit, because honestly, like, clients will get better service and a better work product when there is enough time to do the job really, really well. I mean, I've seen that, and I'm sure you guys have as well. I mean, we talk about the elite nature of law firms. I mean, some of the poorest quality work I've ever seen came out of the world's one of the world's probably largest 5 law firms on a substantial 9-figure deal, and it was almost incoherent. And I'm like, who is writing this and who is reviewing it? And it was because, like, I could tell on the phone call that these people were sleeping on cots in the office if they were sleeping at all. And that's bad for everybody.
It is.
But I don't know that we get away from that until lawyers and clients are willing to kind of engage in recalibrating some of that.
I think some clients just, especially, the ones that are retaining big law services at big law, rates. But I also find in my practice, to the extent I'm better at it, is they want to be trained. They want to know, what can I do so that this is more cost effective and more efficient on your end? Not in a sense that's like, I don't want to pay for this, but how can I train my team so that when I'm bringing you this problem, like, let's take mechanics liens for an issue. Those are prescriptive. Those take process to get from start to finish. And so the idea being, here's 4 steps you can take before you call me, so that when you call me, I can do my job well with enough time to do it, and you can get the response you need. And I'm not going to charge you a premium rate because you need it in 2 minutes. Like, this works better for all of us. And I think moving in that direction is is certainly better for both the client and the lawyer. But I fear that I think, what that general counsel, Grand Poobah, said is, we pay you for this and you're going to do it. And you need to recognize that's the role that you play. There is some legitimate truth to that at that level. Like it just is. Yeah. But one of the points I was going to make, and you work in the healthcare space, so I've never expected my doctor to work on the weekend if I have a cold. Like, I've never tried to call my doctor's
Have you had your doctor's cell phone number?
No.
That's right.
I've never expected to call my doctor's office and get immediately through to my doctor. Like, in my mind, my doctor's seeing patients all day. It's a busy lady. I have my PA's cell phone, which, because we're friends, but I also only, I try to respect her and I only message her through our secure portal healthcare thing. But I guess what I'm saying is we've created this scenario. I don't think doctors are cheaper than lawyers by any stretch of the imagination, yet their boundaries are, you don't call a doctor's office and be like, I'd like to speak to Dr. So-and-so. And they're like, oh yeah, hold on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you don't get to talk to the doctor. Do you want to leave a message with the nurse? The nurse will call you back. And so I'm trying to replicate that sort of same model in a way that still, gives value to my clients. But it's just crazy to me that clients expect to call a lawyer and get a response in the same day that's substantive and well prepared.
Well, I like the example that you shared, because I think we have a shared expectation.
Yeah.
That this is not acceptable and it's not available.
Yeah.
In the medical field, but in the legal field, we have a shared expectation that it absolutely is. Yeah. And especially at certain price points.
Yeah.
And I like that you made the point that a lot of clients, they want to know how to get the service, the best service at the best rates, and that there's a good opportunity to help provide education. And I think part of the challenge is that our industry has been unwilling to, set that boundary and set that line, because we all have this scarcity mindset that there's not going to be enough.
Yeah.
That client's going to go find somebody else who's going to be willing to do it on their, according to whatever the timeline is that they've cultivated. And I think there's also a flawed assumption in there for a lot of clients that aren't, many times the clients, in small business, lower middle market range, which is where we spend most of our time, don't have a lot of experience working with professional advisors. And so there's an assumption that they're knowingly making those requests, when I think a lot of times they just aren't. And in part because the history of our industry has not been to set the boundary and provide the education. It's not been to say, hey, I can provide my best service for you at the best rates and create the most value with you and for you if you give me a reasonable amount of lead time and you respect my non-working hours.
And you never, ever, ever, ever call.
Yeah. But
if you try and set those boundaries, I mean, it is like the lowest denominator of the industry. I mean, that's the problem we run into right now where, even here in Wichita, you have, business lawyers who are sub $200, sub $300 an hour, right? Like, they're not only hurting themselves, they're hurting the rest of the industry, but they're also setting false expectations that like business law in general can be done at that rate.
Right. Yep. And that quality can be created.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
And so
you're absolutely right, Matt.
I think that's also just like, we, my wife and I run behavioral health practices, and we have nurse practitioners who work with us, and they're now just coming into professionalism, being able to be separate and distinct from physicians. And I have to always encourage them, like, it's your time to act like a professional. But it's always weird to me because I sit in an industry where like our peers are not doing that.
Yeah.
Right? Like we need to act like a professional. We need to create boundaries with our clients. We need to be able to have the ability to service our clients appropriately. And there has to be a recognition that like, I think the other day I was looking at someone and they were like a plumber charging like $225 an hour. And I'm like, we have plumbers in our community that are charging more than lawyers will charge.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, I'd be curious your take on this, Matt and Ashlyn.
Not just Matt's then.
Yeah. Too. No, I always value your opinion. I feel like our industry is dominated by a core value of fear.
Yes.
Like it animates everything that we do. And that has gotten completely ingrained into our business models and how we make decisions about that. Instead of having at kind of the forefront value creation.
Yep.
And I think that has spilled over into what the market expects, which is that it's not about value creation. And so large portions of the market, not necessarily big law, but other areas have gravitated towards this is cost management. How cheaply can I get it? Right. Instead of thinking about like, how can I maximize the value of this interaction?
I see it personally, like I think it's fear, but I think it's personally like I see it as like insecurity. Like I think the most insecure human beings on the earth are lawyers. Like we're just not very secure in both ourselves and our businesses.
That makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think it drives a lot of this because you're like, well, if I don't accept that, who will? Well, if they're going to be growing, I'm not growing, right? Like it's always this like analysis of like, am I the best? Am I doing the best? Am I saying yes the most? Like, and it really has in markets where like Dallas is different, I think a little bit because like there are basically the same quality of attorneys at different price points. You just got to find them, you know, the right ones in the market. But here, largely the bar is about equitable and quality, but yet the price point's all over the place. And because of the shrunken market here, I think people, I refer to as like crab in a barrel mentality of like, you know,
you start
crab tries to get out, grab a hold of them, pull them down, try and climb on top of them. And so no one gets out of the bucket. That's what I like in Dallas. I tell someone my rate's $500 or $600 for litigation, and they're literally have never heard a complaint, not once. I use the rate of $400 here, and people are just like, "Ugh, you mean like law costs something?"
I know.
And so it's a culture problem. Like,
it is,
you know,
and an expectation setting problem because where I was working before, in this region, these firms have one or two clients that they have helped found the firm. The firm was founded off of these relationships, and their mindset has always been: if they don't pay us, we can't keep the doors open. And it doesn't matter how many years go by, and it doesn't matter how much you try to diversify, and it doesn't matter the underlying concern is if we don't do what we do for this client. So we have these institutional clients that are getting the lowest rates. We're doing the most work for them at the cheapest rates we're doing work for anybody else. And then wondering why we can't, our profit margins don't increase. And it's like, because we're so afraid to go to our clients and say, hey, so things are getting more expensive. Have you seen the cost of eggs? Like, we have to raise our rates. We cannot afford our rent. We can't afford to pay our bills at what you're paying us to work at. And so what you're going to get if you don't increase my rate is I'm going to churn the crap out of your file, and you're not going to save any money. So this exchange isn't really working because the model is, if you're not paying me enough to cover my expenses and to allow me to make some money, I'm going to burn the file until I can make up the difference. And so you're not getting... So even if you're getting quality legal work at that, which I really think that they do produce quality work, but they're not producing it at an efficient rate on behalf of the client either.
Right. Well, I think that goes to, and then I promise to get back to your story, Matt.
Maybe we will, maybe we won't.
I think I've led us down this rabbit hole a bit more because I'm so fascinated by it.
Me too.
But
we'll break this one into two.
I think one of the things I think that really well illustrates is that when lawyers, and I think this is a big law problem at times, I'm sure, but I think it's industry-wide, especially in traditional law firm models, gravitate towards discounting of their value.
Yeah.
It really deeply incentivizes a misalignment of incentives. Yeah, that was a poorly worded sentence. It really perpetuates and deepens that misalignment of things so that, and in many instances, I think that lawyers that are billing at their discounted rates are justifying ethically, like, hey, I can work more on it because, I'm charging such a low rate. It's already absorbed into the value that I'm creating. This is still equitable.
Yeah.
And I think it's that deeper problem, I think, of partly that people aren't focusing on. I mean, we run into this all the time, like, hey, don't focus on the hourly rate because that doesn't tell you what the bill is going to be.
Right.
Focus on what is the budget, what is the project cost,
right,
and how do you manage value around what things are actually going to cost rather than the unit cost.
Yep.
And it's like people only care about, what is the unit cost? Like if someone was to come to me for a healthcare service, like what you described to me before, and if I felt comfortable agreeing to do it for them, which, based on the niche service that you mentioned earlier, I would not. I'd be like, my best help here is to call Matt.
I say that a lot.
It would cost an extraordinarily larger amount for a vastly inferior product because I don't know what the hell I'm doing on that one.
Right.
And people think that because we've commoditized the industry, that these things are fungible. Like, oh, just go find another lawyer that will do that. Like, hey, don't you do that kind of thing? Like, no, I don't handle a divorce, a DUI, and an M&A transaction.
All at once.
That only happens on TV.
Because there are lawyers in this region, in this town, who will say yes.
Yes to all.
That's the problem. Is that they because and they're charging $130 an hour to do it, and so then we get
door law.
We end up
what's that?
Door law. Anything
yes,
that comes to the
anything
door.
that walks in the door, and then. What happens
Yeah.
on my end is that these clients wise up enough that they somehow trickle to me on their elbow deep in this dispute, and I look at the lawyering that's been done, and I hate to say, man, it's going to cost you triple to undo the damage I now have to do because you had a criminal attorney taking on a really complex commercial dispute that your lawsuit, I got to amend your pleading. Like, we have to go all the way back to ground zero here, and I don't want to throw anybody under the mud, but at the same time, no one, if you don't stay in your lane and you don't charge enough for your lane, you're taking everything in. It creates a mess. And then the clients are like, why are you so expensive?
Like, because I'm doing it correctly.
Because I'm going to do it right.
And you've handed me 2 projects now. Fix the old one and do the new one correctly.
Then, I get you what you need here.
Yeah.
And it's expensive. And it just, you don't go to your doctor and say, how dare you, tell me I have this medical diagnosis and why can't you fix it cheaper? It's like, I didn't create this. This is a situation that has been created outside of my control. But you know what I want to talk about, Matthew? I want to talk more about, okay, so you said, I'm out. This isn't working for me. You came to the revelation. Did it come on your own, or did someone gently, like in Sam and I's situation, go, hey, I think this isn't going great. And I think we need to look at alternative solutions for your line of work.
Honestly, both fortunately and unfortunately, my wife is so supportive that she probably would have never told me to leave.
Yeah.
And so, for me, it was mostly me. I mean, I saw the harm to my marriage. I saw, the inability to spend Christmas with my child, on Christmas Day. Like, it just started adding up more and more and more. I think I've told Sam before, my rate effective September 1 there was $1,020 an hour, which, asking someone to pay $10,000 a day for your services is, the people here balk at $400 an hour, but it's like, I was, and even at that, even in the Texas market, people wouldn't complain about it.
Yeah, but they would expect something in return from you.
That's right.
You had that exchange has to continue to have value for you too.
Has to have high value.
And I think the point that you made that I think is so important is that a lot of people reach is that you keep being told, just wait till you get here. Wait till you get to the pinnacle. Wait till you're a partner. Wait till you can then run your career on the backs of all these other humans that are existing and chasing the same chase. They're just behind you in it. And then you get there and some of us turn around and we see there's no peace this way and we see we're going to have to do the same things that were done to us that way. And then, we're like, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And so I think it was insightful of you. And I tell anyone that makes a career change is incredibly brave to just say, that's not going to work for me or my family, especially when you're so far deep in it, as you were, just ready. Because a lot of people are like, well, I've made it this far. Let's just...
I mean, honestly, there's many people who are just like, just be partner.
Yeah.
Like, just see how it works out.
Yeah.
Like, just give it a few years.
Yeah. Just give more of yourself.
That's right.
Go all in on hell.
And that was just hard because it was like, at some point you have nothing more to give.
Right.
And I don't know that I was there yet, but I also, I didn't want to get there. I didn't want to be in the same space where like that partner was, or, to feel like, none of this is worth it anymore.
What a beautiful, vulnerable moment for that partner, although they probably didn't intentionally, or maybe they did create that situation for you, but to give some vulnerability and clarity into like what
That's right.
it looked like, because you have that to fall back on and be like, wait, I don't want that to be my experience. And I remember sort of waking up in my own situation and being like, because what I kept being told was, because I was a partner, but well, like, fix it. Like, that we don't do this for this, or this well. Like, you could be the head of that committee. And I'm like, wait, you're giving me more things I could fix and champion and be in control of and in charge of. Until one day, the only thing that I was fixing was something I was becoming like the person who was handling a bunch of problems at my firm. And my family was like, hey, like, we are here too. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm very busy solving the world's problems. Like, can't you guys see how important I am? Like, all these people need me. And when, then my life changed and I had to get perspective and things happened. And then you look and you're like, wait, this place will take and take and take and take and take from you.
That's right. Until
you do wake up and have nothing left. But then at that point, I think Sam and I talk about a lot. Some people are just like, well, I'm already here now. Like, now I am Big Law. I am.
That's that partner's perspective to this day.
Yeah.
Like, he's just like, I have a multi-million-dollar home. I have a wife with extremely high expectations. I have kids who go to private schools. I have to keep my clients sort of happy and going to like fancy destinations and all of that stuff. And it was just like, the only way to exist anymore was with more resources than happiness.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what you trade.
Yeah.
Matt, do you feel like that's something you observed from a lot of people in Big Law? I mean, I can't imagine that, let me ask it as a question rather than a statement. Really good at statements, folks.
Objection, leading the witness.
Yeah. Thank you. Did you perceive that your peers were aware of the same level of issues and challenges that you were? Like let's call it the attorneys, 35 to 40 and under.
Probably not. Like,
okay.
My therapist tells me I understand my brain better than anyone he knows. So that probably
a lot more self-reflection happening here than probably out there in the world.
Gotcha.
Like, I don't think they're thinking about those things. I mean, part of it for me was, it was easy to say, hey, having good mental health is important, and at least paying lip service to the concept.
Yeah.
But when we started our behavioral health practice and we started pushing both that narrative in our community and in our family and our own, personal circles, it felt deeply hypocritical to be part of such an institution that largely didn't care about mental health. But, you were sort of there being part of the system.
Yeah. So you're both trying to solve a problem and contribute to it at the same time. And you're like, I can't sit on both sides of this coin. And I think I relate to that very much because it's just, so like my husband has combat PTSD, and like we've been very outwardly verbal and honest about, we've been in therapy together separately for decades. Decades is a stretch. I'm not that old. I'm not Sam old. But
so old.
Getting there.
I'm like getting out there in years, but we're like very open about our mental health. And when I would go to therapy, even before I left my firm, people were like, oh, where are you headed? I'm like, oh, I'm going to therapy. Like I was very open about it. And then I, just like you start to realize, I think I'm living in a situation that I'm trying to convince people that this sort of mental health aspect is important while perpetuating terrible mental health practices on people. And
just as a comment to that, honestly, what it took for me was one of my colleagues who was struggling, and he's a little bit younger than me. I mentor him quite a bit. And I sort of, I dealt with childhood abuse.
Okay.
He dealt with childhood abuse. And two other of our colleagues there had dealt with some pretty rough childhood trauma. And it was the point where I realized that Big Law found an advantage into tapping into our abuse cycles so that they could get the economic outcome they were looking for. And that's where I was like, this is really fucked up.
Yeah, that is. And it's, again, a way to monetize instead of saying, wait, take care of yourself, it's like, wait, how can I make money off that?
Yeah.
And Matt,
I don't think it's intentional. I don't think they have like a committee hey, that kid had this sort of abuse. Like, how do we tap into that?
Yeah.
Like, really get our, like, I just think it's designed from the notion of like.
But do you think that they're in a position where they're aware of that kind of thing, or at least they should be aware of that?
Independently, no.
Okay.
Culturally, yes.
Yeah.
But I don't know that they care.
I don't think they do.
Meaning
no,
that,
I would
like,
absolutely agree with that.
Even at that law firm, the last one I was at, we, during my time there, lost 3 attorneys. I was there less than 3 years.
And when you say lost, you mean?
To suicide.
Okay. Wow.
And the management had to be begged to just do anything, to change anything. And honestly, what irked the hell out of me is every single time someone died, you would hear from the management down to the staff, someone talking shit on their family.
Wow.
Meaning
You're
saying,
kidding.
in the instance of one of our associates who committed suicide, it wasn't the law firm. Her and her husband were on the outs, and her husband was just like really stressing her, and just like as if we had no connection to her stress load.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that group think. It's always them, never us.
That's right.
That is so unbelievably toxic that breaking up with it, I don't know if this was your experience too, breaking up with that group think, then my fear was that I'd heard it happen so much that the minute I walked away from it, that I would also, they'd be like, well, she clearly isn't a good enough lawyer to work here. Like, she's clearly not smart enough or capable enough or all of those things. And it's so sad how being in part of a culture like that, like we don't even see it happening until, because those people were probably good humans, but they just have to justify their own existence in the group. And the only way to do that is to make the person who they probably relate to, who's decided their life isn't even worth living anymore. They probably have some sort of relation to that, but the only way to solve that is that's a them, this isn't us.
Well, as long as we can always say that like the death of attorneys in our industry is a direct responsibility of somebody else's, we don't have to change what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the biggest way to deflect from the fact that like we have, I think it's the second most suicides of any industry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yet,
I think after healthcare.
Yeah. It's healthcare. Yeah. And I tell people it's very simple. Any industry, because we deal with this with our behavioral health practice, but any industry where you take on the problems and traumas of your client base, you're going to have that to take home.
Right.
So the rest of our industry shouldn't tax us.
Yeah.
Right? Like our
100%.
client work is hard enough on the human soul that we should do everything else that we can to make what we do as lawyers better.
Yeah.
We're trying to, like the sort of model that I've sort of tried to develop my firm on is what I refer to as like the low stress law model. And pretty
Tell
much
me more about that.
Yeah.
I want that model.
So for me, honestly, it starts with charging a rate that you can ensure always covers your dues.
Yeah.
And so for me, I really don't lower my rate less than $400 an hour. I don't accept work less than $400 an hour. I don't mess with work less than $400 an hour.
And to those listening who are looking at setting a boundary like that with a fear in the background, then no one will pay me. People hire you.
Yeah, I have now been able to, in 3 months of my, starting my law firm, I've retained an of counsel and I'm staffing her already.
That's
So
awesome.
The fear then that if I charge what I'm worth, charge what I need to survive on, no one will pay me or hire me is not true. That's the story we tell ourselves.
No, it means you got to work less hours.
Yeah.
Like the way I say low stress law is like if you can base your fundamental notion that you're not going to lowball yourself.
Yeah.
And you'll make the effort to generate the work that's necessary there. When I left my law firm, I was getting paid 27.5% of what I was generating.
Yeah.
And so to replace that for me, it meant that I basically had to work 10 hours a week.
Yeah.
So the way I've structured it is when I get to 10 hours, I've basically made what I was already making.
Yeah.
When I get to 20 hours, I'm already working a good amount of hours. And when I get to 30 hours, I bring on a new associate or a new attorney to start taking on those additional 10 hours and growing up their book as well. And the idea is that no one really will ever work more than 30 hours, but largely will try and stay around 20.
Yeah.
Now, for some attorneys, that's not going to work, right? Like they're going to be like, look, I'm sort of a hard driving. I want to work 50 hours a week. That's great. I just don't think we're the right model then for you. Like there are law firms out there that do that who look like that, who exist like that, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But the design is that we can live really high quality lives with great compensation without taxing our souls.
Yeah. 100%. I love that. And how's it? I mean, and it's going well.
It's been going very well so far.
Yeah.
I think the last 3 weeks I've billed an average of 28 hours.
Dude, that's awesome.
I think that's amazing. I think you have so much to be proud of. And I think it's so important for people who I hope are listening to hear, because Sam and I sort of say something very similar, is that people laugh when I say this. We're like, why did you leave, your law firm? I'm like, well, I wanted to work less and make more money. And they're like, and I'm
wait, really? Yeah.
No, I want to work less and make more money. I want to take my kids to the bus in the morning. And like little moments are of priority for me that I want to work out. I want to go to the gym. But I'm not going to sacrifice my lifestyle. But how can I make both happen? And it's so affirming. And I would have loved to have heard that exact thing you just said. And Sam said it to me, fortunately. When I left and was starting my own practice, is you are capable, you know what you're doing, and people will pay you for it. And you just have to stick to the truth of that.
Right.
And it's so important to hear, and I'm so glad for it. And to be able to share sort of a story that I think will make people give them the confidence if they're stuck in a situation like we have all been in, to say, wait, someone will pay me.
Right. Well, and I think it really goes to this fundamental idea that you can design something that works to optimize around what's most important to you, but you have to be intentional with it, and you have to be really thoughtful about it, because you've got, I think, your model, which I love, is I think a wonderful illustration of the idea that you can create the culture that you want if you are really diligent at harmonizing it with the business model. And I think where a lot of attorneys get stuck, whether it's in traditional law firms or otherwise, is that they want the culture, they want the lifestyle, but then they go out and they undercut their rates.
Yeah.
Or they start taking on too many, payment risk clients, not respecting their own value enough. And you can't have a successful model like what you've described if you're not willing to diligently design and integrate your business model to support your culture.
Yeah.
And I think for anybody who's listening that's thinking about that, you've got to be really diligent with both. Give yourself grace, learn from it. I certainly have. I made so many mistakes with, anyway, we'll talk about this another time. But
not me, I've never made a mistake in my life.
Yeah, so. True story. That'll be in your intro next episode. But Matt, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Really appreciate it. Man, I'm so excited for you. I'm so proud of you, the courage it takes to, take that leap. Man, good job.
Well,
keep it up.
Ashlyn's saying, you were a big part of that and encouraging that. And I think it needs to be recognized that you're pushing the right sort of culture into our community as well.
Yes.
And that's very much appreciated.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Matt, one of the things we like to close out every episode with is encouraging folks to think about this concept of better law. We've talked a lot here about big law, and a lot of the challenges and the problems that brings to the table for so many in our industry. That is the ideal, is how can I get to the pinnacle of that mountain? And we want to be a part of a broader conversation and giving people a different ideal to gravitate towards, which, we're using the term better law. When you think about that very broad and vague concept, what is one thing that you would really like to see be a part of that ideal of better law?
Honestly, it's actually a brainstorming because I don't think we have solutions to it yet. But that is, I think the mental health problems in our industry start in law school based on the notion of legal thinking, meaning that legal thinking in and of itself takes anxiety. What are the problems? How many problems are there? How to structure those problems? What could happen? And then they're like, explode that mindset, right? And it's not to say that it's not been effective at creating very good lawyers, but it's also been effective at creating super anxious lawyers.
Yeah.
People who are, endlessly thinking about, oh, what's that problem? Or what's this issue? Or like you're having a conversation with your grandma and she's telling you about her car wreck and you're like, oh, well, that's a lawsuit and that's a lawsuit. And you're like, what about grandma? Right?
Like, wait, grandma, sorry, are you okay?
Right? Yeah, that's right. It's like it's part of that problem of like, if I could start anywhere, it would be having our industry start thinking about how do we create minds that are good at legal thinking without the anxiety.
And because I'm here and I have a microphone, I would add to that part of that problem has to be those that manage ethical complaints in our licensing lawyers have to feel like they will be supported and have their backs when lawyers make smart, thoughtful, mindful, discretionary choices, because a lot of what we do is based on discretion. And I think a lot of the anxiety about covering all of our bases and making sure everything is done well is this constant fear that all the client has to do is write a letter to say that we've violated some rule, and then we are instantly put in a situation where we have to defend every decision we've made leading up to that moment. And that we have a huge responsibility as lawyers, and I think that the ethics are important. But I have felt that on the backside of that in our industry, that the more anxiety is driven is we have to cover every basis and do the very best and answer every solution, because we don't want on the back end for someone to question whether we did a good enough job ethically, not just did we win, but did we hold up our responsibilities? And maybe that's just me that is stressed by that, but I have other lawyers who are like, I just have felt like it requires, again, like you said, like a brainstorming of everyone involved to say, what can we do to reduce the anxiety in the practice of law and sort of replace it with confidence and clarity and, more time.
Well, and I think it's a great example of that's where I think a lot of it begins is that I like that word you use, that explosion of risk awareness, monitoring, and management.
Yeah.
And our focus isn't on, hey, how can I go create as much value as possible here?
That's right.
The only thing that is well, I shouldn't say the only thing. Almost exclusively, it seems like everything is tailored towards risk awareness and resolution.
Yeah.
And that's a great observation, Matt. And I think that's something that really deserves a lot of further consideration. And as we grow our practices and we work with the younger attorneys that work with us, each of us in our businesses, I mean, that's an opportunity we have to help people adopt a different mindset.
That's right.
That is honestly, I think, more helpful for the client and for the attorney. Because clients don't come to us just because they want to manage a risk. I mean, sometimes that's what it is, but because they're trying to go create value.
Yeah.
We could talk at length about a lot of that stuff.
I think we should have an episode
that's a great
on that,
observation.
for sure. And I hope that you'll come back and do more with us here, because I think it's so important. But yeah, talking to and training and working through both lawyers who've been at it for a long time, but younger lawyers about that exact sort of approach and like, how do we not pass our anxiety onto our clients? Because we're like, well, then you have this and this and this and this, and here's all this other risk. So many
it's
things.
like we forget that we're also teachers though too, and I think that we replicate that anxiety from law school on our own teaching as well, without thinking about the fact that it's like, well, wait a second, like it's like, okay, so now you're seeing all the problems the associate didn't see. Should you go blow that up in their face so that they're going to lose sleep tonight thinking about all those problems too, right?
Absolutely.
Or should you coach them politely through the process so that they have a good understanding of what you're seeing, why you've seen it, and the experiences you've had that led up to that, right?
Totally. And saying, if you knew all of this already, then you wouldn't need to have been learning from me. Like part of my job is to recognize, you wouldn't even need me, and you would be charging what I charge. Like,
I mean, creating an expectation of learning and progress.
Yeah.
I mean, which I think is, the norm in big law is you make a mistake, you get hauled in front of a partner and you get reamed out. And it's not like, hey, I've noticed that you've made a lot of progress.
Yeah.
Like I imagine people aren't coming in and doing that unless you've worked an insane amount over the holidays, apparently. But I mean, and that's not, I don't think that that's conducive towards maximizing our potential as humans. No. It's definitely not good for the experience and the secondary effects of everything that we do. But
I've always thought like the crushing of the associate spirit is largely beneficial to the overall law firm, because if they lack confidence, their ability to move to another law firm or open up their own law firm is greatly hindered.
Yep.
I felt that way myself. I felt that after I got out, and I started working on the firm and was out about 2 months, I started noticing all of the reasons for the triggers for my doubts were based on the way that they had treated me as a lawyer.
Yeah.
It's that notion of like, well, if I call him in and I ream him and make him, think that this is sort of the end of the world over, this misplaced comma, right?
Yes.
Then it's like, will he think he can run his own law firm?
Right.
Will he have confidence in himself to do those things?
Right.
Or apply to a different firm.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's a group think. It again, is like this toxic culture that's like, we need them to think they need us, that we're doing them a favor by employing them. So they should just continue to produce for us. And I remember that exact moment too, when I don't remember what I was doing, something I'm, months into practicing law on my own. And I'm like, wait, I'm a good lawyer. Like I was like, what am I going to do without all these people correcting all my errors on the back end? And it's like, I'm actually pretty good at this. And I think you're right. I think it's all part of that culture.
Yeah.
And I'm just so glad that we got to talk about it. And I hope that we keep talking about these things and that you keep talking about these things because you have such an interesting perspective to share. And I'm really glad you shared it with us. Yeah. Thank you for being here.
I appreciate y'all having me.
Matt, congrats on the big move.
Congratulations.
And man, just keep crushing it, dude. Thanks. I mean, you're bringing a really important perspective. You're part of this bigger story that we're all part of. It really, really matters. I mean, the people that see it, that interact with a different way are going to have a model to say, hey, that's possible. Yeah. And I think that's going to continue to catch on. It's going to continue to change our industry. It's not just the idea. It's seeing it modeled. Kudos to you guys. Man, let's keep crushing it. All right. Thank you for tuning in. This has been another fabulous episode. I mean, honestly, this stuff just really matters, folks. Please pay attention to it. Please find opportunities to engage in making our industry better. People's lives are literally on the line.
And if you feel yourself in a situation where it feels hopeless or it feels like there isn't something better or that there is nowhere else to turn and that the pressure, you found yourself in a situation you can't get out of, you can, and there is hope and there is lots of places to turn. And we'll put some of those resources in the resource comment section of where we put those.
And certainly feel free to reach out to me or I'm sure any of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'd love to be an encouraging voice for you if you need, you just need a sounding board or need help.
Totally.
Give us a shout. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.